Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara Seidler.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
It's official. Labor has won the federal election in what can only be described as a landslide victory. It was a historic win, with Anthony Albanese becoming the first Prime Minister since John Howard in 2004 to win 2 elections in a row. Not only did the Labor Party win, but they increased the majority with which they will now govern in Australia. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happened on Saturday and what it will mean for the country moving forward.
Zara, we were just saying whether or not people predicted this. I feel like the polling, they did predict a Labor majority government, but not like this. This was a complete landslide.
I mean, shout out to YouGov, because the day before the election, they published their last polling or their last predictions, and it was like pretty much exactly this.
Yeah.
They predicted, but yes, widely we were hearing and reading about a majority, perhaps not the vast majority that Labor will now govern with.
So do you want to just take us through by how much did Labor actually win this election?
By a lot is the short answer. So at this stage, and it's important to recognise that counting continues as we speak. So I will just preface it by saying this could change. But right now, Labor has won at least 85 seats in the House of Representatives. That's according to the ABC. As we've spoken about many times on this podcast before, any party needs 76 to govern with a majority. And so not only has Labor got to that 76, but they have well and truly exceeded that number. At the last election, just for context, Labor picked up 77 seats. So they've increased from 77 to at least 85, with potentially more on the way.
Yeah, at least in my lifetime, I don't remember anything like this happening before, with Labor winning by such a landslide. The only thing I can compare it to is when Kevin Rudd won in 2007. But I don't know if that will resonate with listeners. I mean, I don't remember it, but I remember hearing about it for so many years after, because it was such a decisive victory for Kevin Rudd. But his government won by 83 seats.
Yeah.
So Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party has actually won by even more than Kevin Rudd won when he did it with that very famous slogan, Kevin 07.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting here is that, so I don't know if we've spoken about it on the pod, but in the days leading up to a federal election, or any election really, a lot of traditional newspapers will publish their kind of editorials, their endorsements for which candidate they believe should win. And what I found remarkable about the endorsements this year was that basically every newspaper across the country was saying neither leader deserves to win and neither party deserves to win. And yet, despite the fact that many were claiming this was an uninspiring election where they didn't think that anyone deserved a clear majority, the people have suggested otherwise.
Yeah. So that's Labor.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the coalition. We know objectively it was a very bad night for them.
It was.
Do you want to just tell us about their loss?
Okay, so at this stage, the coalition, which is the Liberals and the Nationals, they've won at least 37 seats. Now, at the last election, they won 58 seats. So they were looking to increase, obviously, the number of seats that they held. They wanted to reach that 76 number. Not only did they not reach that, but they have quite substantially gone backwards. They have lost a lot of seats. So they're looking at a loss of potentially 20 seats in the House of Reps.
That is wild.
Yeah, it's a really significant loss. And I think we'll go into what Peter Dutton has said about it and what people in the party are saying. Some election analysts, I know that David Spears over on the ABC on election night was suggesting that this could be the coalition's lowest ever primary vote. So the coalition is looking right now a bit of an existential threat to their future here.
Yeah. And we should mention that Peter Dutton, the Liberal leader, he lost his own seat of Dixon, which we talked about in the lead up to the election as a possibility, but we said that's quite rare that it would ever happen. In fact, if we go back to the 2007 election that I was just talking about.
It's getting a lot of airtime this election.
The last time that this happened was when John Howard did lose to Kevin Rudd.
Yeah, exactly. And so while Peter Dutton had kind of presided over this marginal seat for decades, like it wasn't new that Dixon was a marginal seat. Ali France, who ended up winning the seat off him, had actually contested that seat 3 times. So it wasn't necessarily that it was surprising that the seat was marginal, but the swing against the Liberal Party certainly had a lot of attention on election night.
I was going to say, to put it into context by how much Peter Dutton lost his own seat, that seat of Dixon at the next election will not even be considered marginal by the technical definition.
Yeah.
Ali France won that seat by much more than 56% of the votes, which is the technical definition for what it needs to be under for a marginal seat. So the fact that at the next election, Dixon won't even be considered marginal is quite wild.
I don't know if this is a rogue thing to say. I don't think the term marginal seat holds much value anymore.
I was thinking that because, I'm sure the Liberal Party will try to win that seat back.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was such a decisive win for Ali France is just crazy.
But like last election, there are a bunch of marginal seats. This election, there are a bunch of marginal seats. Half of them have turned out, some people have increased their majority. I just think like some of the language that we're using perhaps isn't serving the modern political circumstances we find ourselves in.
I guess you could say that the swings have been swinging.
Yeah.
The swings have been swinging so far.
Lots of swinging, seriously.
And what have you heard people saying about why the coalition lost this election? I guess there are two ways you can look at it. Labor winning and the coalition losing. But let's just focus on the coalition losing. What are experts saying about why that happened?
Yeah, so on election night, we heard from a lot of Liberal or coalition senators and MPs about what they were seeing unfold. And something that really stuck out to me was James Paterson, who's a Liberal senator. He was very explicit about the impact of Donald Trump's presidency on the Liberal Party. And I hadn't heard it as explicitly recognised by the Liberal Party themselves until election night. But he was saying the Trump effect was monumental and that it was an impossible hurdle for the Liberal Party to overcome. We know that if we look at Canada and we now look here, the effect of the Trump presidency has seen a return to kind of centrist incumbent governments. And that's what's happened here. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest factors, or certainly that's what the Liberal Party is saying. I will just acknowledge, though, that that is an external factor. So it makes sense that some people inside the party will be pointing to that because they couldn't really control it.
You mentioned Canada. For those who missed it, Canada did also just have an election and they saw their centre-left party win in a landslide as well.
Yeah.
In terms of an internal factor of why the coalition lost, I wonder if it did have something to do with the youth vote, because this was the first election that Gen Z and millennials outnumbered baby boomers. And, even at the Daily Aus, we tried to interview Peter Dutton many times. I mean, literally day after day, we put in requests and we didn't get anything back. And we are the biggest youth publisher in Australia. And it's not just that Peter Dutton refused to speak to us, but from my understanding, he refused to basically speak to any youth news service in the country. And I think when you are not meeting young people where they're at, then they're not willing to meet you where you're at. And I definitely think that we saw that in the election.
That certainly could be one factor. I mean, the Liberal Party lost votes at every kind of step of the demographic ladder. So it'll be interesting to see. Usually after an electoral loss, we do see the party that loses do an analysis of what happened at the election. It's usually run by someone inside the party and then someone kind of adjacent to the party. So we'll wait to see what happens there and what the Liberal Party attributes to their loss, because last election, when the teals were very successful, the Liberal Party analysis found that they needed to do more to court women and to bring women into the party. And so this time it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that analysis is.
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus, just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
Let's move to minor parties and independents. First, the Greens.
Yep.
They definitely did not have the night that they were hoping for.
No. So while the Greens did increase their overall primary vote, they have struggled to retain or pick up any new seats in the House of Representatives. So starting with leader Adam Bandt. So he held Melbourne, the seat of Melbourne, with a very comfortable margin. He has seen quite a swing away from him in that seat. The ABC at the time of recording hasn't called it for Bandt. He is slightly ahead though, so it does look like he'll be able to retain that seat. But aside from Melbourne, the Greens have already conceded the seats of Griffith and Brisbane. Those were two seats they picked up at the last election. And certainly Max Chandler Mather, who was the MP for Griffith, had been quite a focus of the media and he had dominated a lot of headlines. So that was a big one for the Greens to lose. Putting aside the Greens for a moment, because we know that the crossbench is made up not only of the Greens but also of independents and other minor parties, every single teal who contested the election, so everyone who was an MP previously and contested, they all retained their seats. So every single teal MP retained their seat. And I think, again, to talk about the Liberal Party, that will be an interesting thing for them to look at because they broadly considered the teal movement to be a moment in time, a protest vote, as it were. And this shows that they have actually not only been re-elected, but most of them have actually increased their margins as well.
So interesting. I feel like we could do a podcast analysing the results of, each party, each independent, the Greens, all so interesting. But I want to move on. So far we have focused on the House of Representatives, and that's because that is the house where government forms. Yeah. But Australia was also voting for half of the Senate.
Correct.
Do you want to take us through what happened in the Senate?
I don't want to disappoint listeners, but there is a lot that we don't know. So the counting for the Senate takes quite a bit longer. As you said, because it's not where government is formed, it tends to take a bit longer to understand what we're looking at. There are predictions that Labor could increase its majority in the upper house, but nothing there is confirmed. A lot of the headlines that we saw over the weekend focused on one senator in particular. That was ACT Senator David Pocock. And we've spoken about him a lot on this podcast before. But what is being focused on this time is that he looks like he has doubled his vote from the last election. So he was a first-time senator at the last election. If you are a senator from one of the territories, you are up for re-election every 3 years. Super confusing. Not sure why we can't just make the whole country the same, but that's for another time. And he looks like he's doubled that vote kind of just in the last 3 years. So a lot of focus there, a lot of focus for what that means for Katie Gallagher, who's also an ACT senator from the Labor Party. And that'll certainly be a focus in the days and weeks to come.
Just two other results that I think are worth mentioning from the Senate. It looks like Pauline Hanson's One Nation has picked up votes and there has been a swing towards her across the country in the Senate, which I think is worth mentioning. We mentioned on the podcast that her daughter was running in Tasmania. We don't know yet if she has won that seat, but definitely there has been a swing towards One Nation in the Senate. And then also I think worth mentioning that the Trumpet of Patriots, I'm sure, there are so many people listening who probably received texts from them throughout the campaign. They have not won any seat in either the House of Representatives or in the Senate.
Yeah, and important to note that Pauline Hanson herself wasn't up for re-election at this election. But yeah, as you said, we have seen a swing towards her party in the Senate. Billi, just before we end, we had a lot of to and fro with our audience over the weekend, which was amazing, over on Instagram stories. And one of the most recurring questions we got asked was, when are all of the things that Labor promised actually going to happen? And I think that it's an important thing to just really quickly discuss and explain, because some of it will need to go through Parliament. A lot of it will need to go through Parliament. So the government, when Parliament is formed, they will need to introduce legislation and then they'll need to pass it through both houses of Parliament. So it's not like we can wake up tomorrow and all of the things that Labor promised happen. The reality also is that sometimes political parties promise things during elections that they don't fulfill. So that's our role as journalists, to hold them to account and to, keep an eye on what the election commitments were and what actually happens during the term of Parliament.
And you can bet that we'll be knocking on their doors for interviews as this term goes on.
So, Billi, just to end now, what happens from here? Let's start first with the Liberal Party. What happens for them from here?
Yeah, so because Peter Dutton lost his seat, they definitely now need to find a new leader. And that will look like the MPs that did win their seats, they will then do a vote as to who their new leader will be. In terms of who the front runners will be, Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor looks like a front runner. And then the Deputy Liberal leader, Susan Lee, will also likely be in the running. But I think what's interesting is that over the past two elections, the Liberal Party has lost so many of their key members. I'm also thinking of Josh Frydenberg, who lost his seat at the 2022 election, who at the time looked like he would definitely be the next Liberal leader. So I think it'll be really interesting to see who they choose as their next Liberal leader. And then in terms of Labor, obviously they have their leader in Anthony Albanese. I did hear yesterday Treasurer Jim Chalmers saying that he thinks that Anthony Albanese will try for a third term. So this is his second term, and Jim Chalmers said that he thinks that at the next election, Anthony Albanese will remain Labor leader and will try to go for a third term. In Australia, Zara, you might be able to correct me, I don't think we have any maximum limit on how long someone can be a Prime Minister for.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We're different to the US in that way, but we're not going to get ahead of ourselves.
No.
We just finished with an election. We're very tired. So let's not set our sights for the next election.
But I think it speaks to how confident Labor is in obviously how decisive this victory was.
Yeah, no, super interesting, Billi, and we will make sure that we are unpacking more results as they come through. But thank you for joining us for that mammoth of an election. We appreciate all the support that you have given us, and we couldn't do it without you, our amazing, amazing audience. We'll be back again later today with the headlines, but until then, have a great Monday.